Hey, good morning. Welcome to New Day Live. So happy you are tuning in. Today I am concluding this series, Who is This Jesus Guy Anyway?, with some more of Jesus' personal testimony recorded in the Bible in John chapter 15. And by the way, hasn't this been a rich series? Man, I have so enjoyed teaching this. And if you missed any of the 4 previous messages, we have them for you on demand at our website, newdaychurchbrandon.org. So if you've missed a message, go there and catch up. All right, let me tell you a little personal story to begin with. Most of you probably live in an area where you have a trash day or two, right? Where the trash is picked up at your curbside a couple of times a week. Well, the first church I pastored was a small country church in southern Oklahoma, and our trash day was pretty much whenever we decided it was. Because instead of trash trucks picking up at our curbside, we had a burn barrel on the backside of our property. We lived out, this was a country church. Are you familiar with the concept of the burn barrel? Probably you are, where you just throw your trash in and burn it, right? Well, my young sons, little bitty boys at the time, they thought the burn barrel was just the coolest thing they'd ever seen. So they always wanted to help me carry the trash. Now, when we first moved in there, I didn't think that was a good idea, but finally they wore me down, you know. And so I told them, okay, today you're going to help me with the trash. Well, it was really a disaster. We got in, it was in the little utility room. I picked up the 2 bags of trash. We opened the door to the carport with 2 steps down, and each one of them grabbed a bag, thinking they had it all by themselves, when in fact I was holding on more than they were. We all 3 tried to get out the door at the same time, and of course I'm the one that tripped on the step, fell down the other step and onto the carport, on the cement carport, skinned up my arm and my knee. I'm bleeding all over the place, and the boys are scared to death. They think something bad has happened to their dad, and finally I convinced them, you know what, I'm okay, guys, I'm okay. So I'm limping and bleeding out to the barrel, holding onto the trash bags where they can't see me, so they would think they were doing all the work, when in reality I was doing more work by letting them think they were helping me, right? And it's about 50 yards out there to the barrel. And the whole while we're walking, I'm saying, wow, guys, this is great. You're great helpers. I think you should do this. Help me every time we take out the trash. Good job, guys. And those 2 boys were just beaming. They thought, they were like, yes, sir, I'm helping my dad. Just look at me, I'm helping Dad. Now, there's a little bit more to this story, but I think I'll wait to the end of the message to tell you the rest. Would that be okay? Remember what's happening now in this series. Here we are in John 15. It's the night before Jesus is going to the cross. He's been with his disciples. He's washed their feet. He's given them a new command to love one another. Judas has already left the room on his way to go betray Jesus. And at the end of chapter 14, Jesus says these words, "Rise, let us go from here." So Jesus and the disciples begin walking from the Mount of Jerusalem down toward the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus would ultimately be arrested. I'm sure you're familiar with all that. Well, along the way, there would have been various houses with little gardens interspersed. And upon seeing those gardens, Jesus begins talking about the grapevines to these men that would no doubt have been growing there as they walked. Now watch this. Watch what happens. I'm going to read 4 verses for you. Jesus said, "I'm the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I also will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit of itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me." Now, Jesus is using imagery the disciples would have easily understood. They'd grown up in an agrarian culture. They knew all about growing things from the earth. So they would have picked up on what Jesus was trying to teach them quite easily. And that was how to grow in God, how to bear fruit, and how godlike qualities are produced in us. And this is really significant, by the way, for us, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I just get stuck, or at least I feel like I'm stuck. Like I'm just going through the motions in my spiritual life, just doing things for the sake of doing them. You know, have you been there? Doing them just because. I'm sure that's happened to you. So here are the questions I want to consider this morning. Am I really growing, or am I stagnant? Am I becoming more godlike? Am I bearing fruit? Whatever that means, right? Okay, let's unpack these verses a bit. There are three things I want to deal with specifically. The first one is this, and that is the fact that Jesus is the true vine. In fact, if you caught the words in verse 1, he said, I am the true vine. And notice it doesn't say I am a vine or even I am the only vine, but it does say he's the true vine, which may not be that big a deal to us, but would have been a huge deal for the disciples. Because watch this, in their Jewish scriptures, the vine was one of the most common ways God spoke of his relationship to the Hebrew people. Psalm chapter 80 speaks about how God brought a vine out of Egypt, speaking of them. Jeremiah 2 says Israel was a choice vine. Isaiah 5 calls Israel his vineyard. So when the disciples heard Jesus speaking of the vine, they would have taken this very seriously, because they believed, as all Israel believed, that just because they were Jews, they were okay. They were God's special vine. Then Jesus comes along and wrecks their theology by saying, guess what, guys? You are not the vine. I am the vine. He was saying, listen, life is not sourced through attending a religious gathering or going to a synagogue or faithfully obeying all the rules. No, the source of life, all of life, is me, Jesus was saying. So here's the question. What is the source of our life, your life and mine? Where are we rooted? What are we locked into? Does that make sense? From what source are we drawing real, genuine spiritual life? And listen, those are age-old questions, because the people in Jesus' day were no different than us in this regard. Let me give you some examples. Take a look at the people with whom Jesus interacted that were drawing their life from other sources other than God. Like in John chapter 2, when Jesus came to the temple and discovered all those people who were buying and selling and changing money. Do you remember that? And he threw them all out. There in the house of God, instead of drawing life from the Father, they were all about the money. That was their life source. Or how about John chapter 4, the woman at the well? We talked about her a couple of weeks ago. Here she was talking with Jesus, and it comes to light that she had 5 previous husbands and living with another man at the time. So where's her life source? Well, it's in relationships. For whatever reason, she's rooted in and attempting to get fulfillment and identity and self-esteem, perhaps, through her relationships. Now listen, how many of you know that a relationship may give you many things and should, but it never was intended to be your source of life? No relationship on this earth was. Or how about the crippled man at the pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5? There's a great story. He's sitting there by this pool, and Jesus walks up and says, so, what's happening? How are you doing? And do you remember this story? You remember what the man says? He says, when the waters are stirred, there's nobody here to come help me into the healing water. And Jesus asks, wait, do you really want to get well? Here's why Jesus asked that question. Because this man had been there at that pool 38 years. 38 years. His identity and his life source, listen to this, was in his crisis. Don't you think he could have found someone to help a brother out when the water stirred if he really wanted to? Or could it be that he simply relished in his crisis? Let me ask you something. Do you know anyone whose life is just one crisis after another? Nothing but drama, drama, drama. Do you know that? Drama queen, drama king, right? And they usually broadcast it all over Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And while a person like that can really be a pain to deal with and to relate to, a pain, so to speak, it is at the same time very sad, isn't it, to watch that play out. And there are many other life sources or vines that we can attach ourselves to out there, but the result will always be the same: heartache and pain. And don't get me wrong, some of those things are not bad in and of themselves. The problem is when we look to those things and depend on those things for our emotional and spiritual health and well-being. Jesus is the true vine, and in Him is the fullness of joy. All right, so Jesus is the true vine. Number two, the Father is the gardener. Watch this. Verse 1 and 2. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Get that? He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes that it will be even more fruitful. Now listen, the thing to remember here is that the Father's goal for the branches is that they bear the best fruit possible, which is something to always keep in mind when you go through a rough patch in your life, when you go through a thin place where you feel like you're getting pruned. Has that ever happened to you? You feel like you're getting cut back a little bit, put in your place a little bit, kind of a thing? And let me say something about this pruning, because it's often misunderstood, due mostly to an unfortunate teaching throughout religious history that God is this angry and vengeful being who is just waiting to pounce on and punish us at the first sign of our disobedience. Was that the way you believed or you were taught growing up in church? Probably. But watch this. When verse 2 says the unfruitful branches are pruned, the translations say that means they are cut off or they are cut back or they are destroyed. But that's not really, that's an unfortunate or inaccurate understanding of the word. A more proper rendering of pruning is to be lifted up. Now think about that. Cut off would have made no sense to a Mediterranean listener. A viticulturist would never throw away a branch, for that would be like amputating part of the vine. Unfruitful branches were lifted out of the dirt and redressed so that they could be nourished by the sun and the wind could pass through. And also it was a way to retrain the vine so that it will bear fruit the next season. So the remedy for unfruitful branches is simply the gardener. He's the remedy. And for us, that's God, our loving and patient gardener, who's not there to slash and burn and cut us off and throw us away when we're face down in the muck of our own self-doing. But rather He is there patiently and lovingly lifting and nurturing us that we may once again prosper and bear fruit. How many of you are grateful that God is for us, not against us? Brother, I am. And of course, those of you who are familiar with this passage would argue against a loving gardener because of verse 6, and I understand that. Verse 6 says, if you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. Here's the deal. Jesus was not referring to fruitless Christians. We already read, He said they are lifted up. No, Jesus was describing those who refused to believe that He was the source of life and wholeness. He was describing the meaningless and empty form of existence of those who look for life outside of the true vine, who is Christ. And then this question has to come up. What is the fruit here that Jesus mentions? Well, do you remember in Galatians chapter 5 where Paul talks about love and joy and peace and gentleness and goodness, etc.? Do you remember that? And he calls those things the fruit of the Holy Spirit, right? And the Holy Spirit is actually the Spirit of Jesus. Now look at verse 5. Jesus said, if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. He's saying that His followers, that would be you and me, are to bear and bring forth much of the character and personality of Jesus as we live our lives. In other words, it is the God in us living out of us. How does that happen? Well, Jesus is the vine, the Father is the gardener, and thirdly, we are the branches. Again, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. You see, vines and branches cannot be understood in isolation in this example Jesus is giving. A vine that has no branches is not much of a vine, and a branch that is not part of a vine is not a branch. It's just a stick. You know what a stick is, right? And look at verse 9. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. Get that? In verse 5, he says, remain in me. And here he says, remain in my love. Now the word remain or abide occurs like 10 times or so in this chapter, depending on which translation you're reading. And what Jesus is doing here is using those two words interchangeably. He's using me and love interchangeably because he wants his followers to understand that he who is love is the supreme life force. And the key to experiencing that life is found in our staying joined to him. Now, there are all sorts of things that will help you with that, to help you stay joined. Things like praying, like reading your Bible, devotional books, sharing your faith journey with others, journaling, whatever. And all those things are good and helpful, but here's the key to them all. You ready? The key is to always remember that Jesus never calls us to produce fruit. Let me start over. I want to say this again. This is so important. Jesus never calls us to produce fruit, only to bear fruit. And I promise you there is a world of difference in that. Most, me included, preachers have preached and taught that we got to produce fruit, we got to produce fruit, we got to produce fruit. But Jesus is saying you can't produce fruit. You can only bear fruit. Think of our passage today. I am the vine, you are the branches, right? If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. A branch doesn't produce fruit. If you saw a branch lying on the ground, you wouldn't take it home and say, yippee, I found a fruit stick. Look at my orange stick. Look at my apple stick, right? No one does that. Why? Because that stick, that branch, has to be attached to the vine or the tree before it can ever bear any life, doesn't it? In the same way, the only good and lasting fruit of godliness and Jesus likeness we can produce is when we are attached and resting in him. And then what happens is we bear what he produces. He produces the fruit in us and we just bear it out to the world. Isn't that great? It's like us this morning. You're watching probably from your home, and you're resting on or in a chair or a sofa this morning, correct? And because that chair or sofa is an inanimate object, it won't be producing anything in us except for like a sore butt if we don't sit up straight, right? That's the idea. It's just resting and trusting in Jesus like you're resting and trusting in whatever you're sitting in right now. Resting and trusting in Jesus that he will produce in you just what you need to bear goodness and godness to your part of this world. And watch this. When you learn to do that, when you learn to rest and trust him, you will also discover it's just what you needed and what God wanted all along. Because as important as the fruit is, the relationship, the being together, that is the ultimate. That being together with him, that's the ultimate. So at my first church out in the country with the burn barrel, right? Remember the story? I had my sons helping me take out that trash, and they did it pretty regular after that first time. And actually, the whole thing was pretty easy for me when I did it by myself. When I started having these little boys help me, it actually made it harder for me. but it made them feel like they were really helping me out. And it gave us some time together, some different time together, and it was very good in that regard. Several years ago, my oldest of those two boys, grown now with children of his own, he was reminiscing with me. And he said, Dad, do you remember taking out the trash to the burn barrel at our first church? And I said, sure I do. I remember that very well. I didn't know you could remember that. You were very small. He said, I do remember that. And he said, Dad, you know, now that I have my own kids, I get what you were doing. It wasn't really about us helping you, because I know looking back, we actually did make it harder for you, not easier. I know. It was just about us being together, wasn't it, Dad? And I said, yeah, it really was. He said, I get that now. Now that I got my own kids, I get that, Dad. And he nailed it, didn't he? My son got it. But watch this, because the same thing happens with us and Jesus. When we determine to be Jesus followers, like my son, we too will one day realize it's not really so much about what we did for Jesus as much as it is what we did with Jesus, that time together. And here's the added bonus. The older my sons get, the more they not only look like me, but also sound like me, and much to their chagrin, act like me. Here's my point. The more you are with Jesus, however that happens for you, prayer, Bible study, meditating, serving your church, whatever, the more you are with Jesus, and I mean with Him, the more you will become like Jesus. And the more you become like Jesus, the more your life will be blessed. And watch this, the more those around you will be blessed too. Isn't that a good thing? You bet it is. Listen, let me challenge you today before I close. And here's the challenge. This week, with intention and resolve, determine that you will on purpose spend good time with Jesus this week. You can do that through reading the Gospels. That'd be a great place, the Gospels record the story of Jesus' life. And you can do that through praying. And you can do that just through loving and helping other people, especially during the times that we're in right now. Acts of kindness are extremely important. Because Jesus says when we do that, when we love and affirm and help and minister to other people, we are actually doing that to Him. He said, when you've done it unto them, you've done it unto me. That's a good thing, right? Listen, I'll be praying for you about this, so take this challenge this week and let me hear from you. Email me or message me with how it goes, will you? You can email me at our website, newdaychurchbrandon.org. You can contact me very easily on any social media through personal messages. I would love to hear about how the challenge is working for you. Any questions you have, any prayer requests you have, shoot those to me, will you? All right, the last thing before I close. Next week, I begin a new series called I Love Jesus But Blank. I love Jesus, but I don't pray much. I love Jesus, but I don't read my Bible very often. I love Jesus, but I sure get mad easy. I love Jesus, but I've got bad habits. I love Jesus, but I cuss a little. Or whatever, right? You're going to love this series, I promise you. So thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for being a part of this. Accept the challenge and let me hear from you. Will you do that? I hope so. I'll be praying for you all week long. God bless you. See you soon. Bye-bye.